Um, so I get the lucky job that I don't have to do all the technical stuff and I just get to talk about what I did. So Sandy asked me to talk a little bit about, I obviously was a Fulbright Scholar. I had a 2012, technically, Fulbright Scholarship, but I went in 2013. And so, yes, Sandy asked me to talk a little bit about my Fulbright journey. And I thought, well, here's a chance to put up all photos of, went to the NBA game and all the food that we ate and all the weight that we put on and all that. But I reflected on it and I thought that actually my Fulbright journey is not about the 4 months that I spent in the US. It's far more than that. It's actually probably a 10-year journey, if I'm honest. So I thought I'd take you through a bit of that and a bit of context about how it's influenced my life. But to start with, maybe I can explain who I am and how I got there first. So I am an academic here in UniSA, Clinical and Health Sciences. So I work in pharmacy. I teach undergraduate pharmacy program. And I'm also a researcher. So my research looks at medicines and improving medicine use and understanding how people vary in terms of their response to medicines. If two people take the same medicine, they have very different responses. And so I use that sort of information to be able to sort of guide how we use medicines better, either in clinical practice, or I do a large component of my work with pharmaceutical industry in new drug development. So the context. I also am a mum of 2 young boys. This will become a little bit more apparent is how this fits in. But Nate is currently 10 and Seb is 5. And obviously they also keep me on my toes. If I go all the way back, I have an undergraduate degree from the University of Adelaide. I have a Bachelor of Science with a major in pharmacology. And I did honours. And the day after I finished in 99, so I'm probably far older than you are. And the day after I finished my honours, I actually came across to work at UniSA, and I've been here ever since. And I started work with a group that was part of the university called the Centre for Pharmaceutical Research. And so what we did is we ran clinical drug trials for pharmaceutical industry. So looking particular at early phase clinical trials. And so I had a lot of my bread and butter early on was around industry work and obviously improving or choosing how medicines are used and drug development. So I worked on that for a few years. And then in 2004, CPR, or Centre for Pharmaceutical Research, actually spun out from the university as a separate entity. So they became a commercial entity and went on to become very large. They are now 2 very large, if anyone works in this area, probably not, but they're 2 very large companies in South Australia and have a great they're now international. But I chose to actually stay at the university. So when they spun out, I realised that what I loved about what I do is that I love doing industry work because I love solving people's problems, because at the end of the day, I just like puzzles. But I also am really curious about things. And so industry work kind of limits that sometimes for you to be able to go off and do whatever you want to do. And so I sort of kept the best of both worlds, if you like, and I stayed at the uni, and that's when I started my PhD. And so I did my PhD part-time. And I finished that in 2011. So as I said, I worked here at the uni. I worked at the same time under a research grant as I did my PhD. So that, having worked before, having a real clear understanding of clinical trials, and also working obviously alongside my PhD, meant that I had a really good understanding of research and I could kind of hit the ground running, if you like. I also am inherently lazy. And so when I realized I had to write a thesis, I went, it's not really that interesting. I'd rather write the papers because I have to write them anyway. And so for me, I did, in my understanding, the first thesis by publication in the university. There's lots of them now, and I highly recommend anyone doing them this way because most people are lazy like me. And so that meant that each of my chapters was a publication in my thesis. And so that also meant that obviously then I had a high number of outputs from my PhD, which really set me up. So it was a great decision. Laziness pays off sometimes. And so obviously I got through that well. And then in late 2011, the week that my thesis was conferred, also the week that I bought a house, I also found out that I got a Fulbright scholarship. So I had a postdoctoral scholarship. So that's the one where it's after you finish your PhD. So maybe slightly different to what we're talking about today, but obviously still kind of along the same lines, if you like. So I applied late in my PhD, obviously went through the interview stage and found out I was awarded it in late 2012. No, late 2011, sorry. And then that was for me to travel in 2012, 2013. So as part of my application, I selected obviously where I was going to go, and I chose to go to University of Buffalo, which is in upstate New York. So this is the building that I worked in, and this is the, if you like, supervisor or mentor that I had for my program. And so his name was Alan Forrest. He was a very lovely man. So the reason I chose to go there was that the type of work that I did, there sort of has evolved a lot over the years, if you like, and there's sort of become more sophisticated type of computational modelling around what that is. And this group at University of Buffalo are sort of the world leaders in that. And so, and Alan had a particular focus on looking at how to implement that in terms of using like antibiotics. So I didn't know him before I went. I knew him through another colleague here in Australia. So I took a chance, and that's where I elected to go. So Buffalo, for those of you who don't know, Buffalo is, as I said, upstate New York. So it's right on the border of Canada. So Niagara Falls is right on the border. And Niagara is the town where Niagara Falls is. But Toronto is the Canadian sort of large city just outside. And Buffalo is on the US side. So it's about half an hour away from Niagara Falls. Freezing cold in winter, which is why I went in summer. And they also ran quite a sophisticated sort of training program at that time of year, which is what dictated the time that we went. And I'll come back to that in a minute. About 4 months before we went, we had our first son. So that made it interesting, let's put it that way. It made it different, but not impossible at all. In fact, it was great for that. And I can talk about that a little bit. But so Nate came with us. My husband obviously came with us. He took long service leave and looked after Nate while I went to work. And it was a great experience for all of us. So just to make it a little bit more complicated. So what was my Fulbright actually like? So this is the point that you probably expect me to say, oh my God, it was so amazing. And I will say that if you look at my Fulbright on paper, it was an utter disaster. And that's when they don't invite me back next year to talk about this. The reason it was a disaster was for a couple of reasons. One is the fact that Alan, my supervisor mentor, ended up with kidney failure and had to go through dialysis treatment while I was there. So that meant he was still at work and he was still there, but it meant that he wasn't there for very large chunks of the day on most days because he had dialysis treatment. The other spanner in the works was, as I mentioned, I chose to go there because they had quite a sophisticated training program. So the University of Buffalo had partnered with a pharmaceutical company called Novartis, and they ran this postdoctoral training program where scholars would spend a year in the university and then go off and spend a year in Novartis. And I had timed it to sort of start with that next cohort. And they actually pulled the funding. And so when I went there wasn't a cohort that came in. So it was different to what I had planned it to be. That didn't mean it wasn't successful at all. We came up with a different sort of project, and I actually overlapped with the scholars going out. So they managed to sort of introduce me to all the good places to eat and all the, how things worked and all that sort of stuff. And there was actually a guy from Australia that I vaguely knew or knew through people. And so he introduced me to lots of people and set me going. So it was different from what I had planned, but certainly still a valuable experience. And we, as part of it, of course, got to do some amazing things. We got to visit some things. We got to go to a certain NBA game, and we got to visit Hoover Dam, and we met some great people and ate a lot of food. Very bad coffee, though. Don't go with coffee. It was an amazing experience. So we had 4 months there. And the last few weeks, we had planned to sort of take off work early and spend it driving around and going to Boston, New York and Washington as a sort of a last loop to sort of see those cities. And again, another spanner in the works is my husband's grandmother, who he was very close to. We found out was quite unwell, so we actually came back early. But we rationalised that we can always do that trip another day. So as I said, on paper, it doesn't look great, but it was actually a hugely beneficial experience. And I think that it's not just that 4 months, as I said, it's about what happened after and how my life has changed since then. So when I came back, actually just before I left, I was awarded, I know these things probably don't mean a lot because it depends what field you're in, but I was awarded a postdoctoral fellowship from, this is national funding, so it's quite sort of high level funding for the type of area that I'm in medical research. And so I was awarded an NHMRC fellowship that I had for 4 years. And that sort of snowballed really a lot of my career. I was elected to the president of the Pharmaceutical Society that I'm a member of. That's sort of my main scientific organisation. And I also had a seat on the International Pharmaceutical Federation, the board of pharmaceutical sciences. So that was quite a prestigious position. And that, of course, then happened at the same time I had the second child. This is Sebastian Seb. So this is actually us on the flight to my first APSA AGM. So what I will say is that it seems quite irrelevant, but actually dragging Nate all the way over the other side of the world means flying to Brisbane with newborn is nothing. And so, you know, everything became achievable. It didn't become a big deal. And then a few years ago, which I'm just coming to the end of now, I was awarded a Cancer Council Fellowship. So the reason I bring these up is that I really honestly do not believe that I would have got the NHMRC Fellowship if I didn't have a Fulbright. And having had that meant that I had all these other things that have snowballed from that. There's something about having a Fulbright, any of these scholarships, I'll say, it's not just about Fulbright, but any of these scholarships, it's like a stamp on your CV or on your track record or whatever that says, yeah, actually someone, it's like a stamp of approval, you know, it's some sort of, you know, big tick that puts you at the top of the list, really, ultimately, and it doesn't ever expire. I'm 10 years later now, and it still is a big tick on my CV, yeah? So what would I say about applying? First of all, I'll say Fulbright is not about academics. It's not about how smart you are. I am by far not the most gifted person in terms of what I do. I shouldn't say that I was seeing people around here. Thankfully, Marnie's not. Yeah. No, but I'm not the smartest. I'm good at what I do. But it's not just about academics. It's about being good at what you do, but also being able to talk to people. If you're going to go there, sit in the lab or behind a computer, whatever you do, for the whole time, and you may be able to, you know, achieve all the things you want to do, but it's not about that. It's actually about going to experience it and being able to, you know, meet people, random people, you know, the people who are, you know, your neighbours where you live, or you know, make friends with the people at the grocery store, because that's what you have to call it over there. So yeah, it's absolutely not about academics. So don't feel like you're not smart enough to apply for this. It's absolutely not about that. Okay, helps, but it's not about it. So when you're writing your application, I would say think about why Fulbright or any of these, this again applies to anything, would want to fund you. And so you make sure your application addresses that. So Fulbright is about cultural exchange, right? How are you going to illustrate that you're going to go there and experience it? Not just do it, but experience everything about it. And particularly there's different sponsored scholarships, if that makes sense. So there's ones that are sponsored. So I had a South Australian scholarship. So for me, I really had to try and express how I was going to benefit South Australia as well as Australia, but South Australia specifically. So that becomes hard because you can tick lots of scholarships you want to apply for, which you absolutely should do. but you want to make sure that whatever you are experiencing and bringing back or taking there as well is going to help tick that box for that specific funder. I would say really, really consider who you want to work with. And I don't say that because, of course, mine fell apart. It's about, no, but it is. So really what saved me was the fact that he, even though Alan wasn't really there, he had a great lab and he had great postdocs and he had great students and great people in his group. That is what actually helped me. Yeah. If he didn't have that, it's about the environment, right? So, and also don't just pick the big name university, pick actually the one, because you're probably just one of many there, if I'm honest. There's that, and that's fine sometimes, but actually really think about where is the institution that is likely to benefit you or your program, right? You know, we all want to go to Harvard, but maybe it's not the best place, right, for you. Very confronting to write a personal statement. I find it, I'm a scientist, and I find that I can't even write in first person, let alone write anything about me, right? But what I will say is don't just replicate your CV. It's not about that. Who are you, right? Show them who you are and how that makes you, you know, how it's sort of in your very fiber of what you are, rather than just this is what I do, yeah? So I was tapped on the shoulder to apply. It wasn't my idea to apply. I was very much tapped on the shoulder, and my first reaction was nah, right? And it was only because someone pushed me again. So pay attention. If someone's tapping you on the shoulder, really honestly think about it, because it's so easy to dismiss it. And I think they see something in you that is suited. So 100% pay attention to that. Of course, don't pay attention to people who, you know, bring you down. I had plenty of people say to me that I couldn't go now that I had a kid, which actually made my experience so much better, because there's nothing like a baby to make people interact with you, right? But yeah, so really pay attention to people, but ignore people as well, right? And what I say is just take a chance, right? You don't know. I think sitting there when we had the Fulbright induction, where they bring all the Fulbrighters from that cohort together to sort of have an induction sort of session, not one person in the room thought that they deserved it, nor thought that they were going to get it. It's always sort of, as I said, it's different. It's not what we're used to. But even if you don't get it, what I will say is the actual process of applying is super valuable. I've used so many parts of my application throughout my career. I still use it. And that personal statement, even though it's really hard to write, is actually really, really valuable process to go through to really think about who you are and what you want to do. So take a chance, have a go. That's all.